Now, hello and welcome to Why the Beatles Matter. This is Sean Gaylord, and I am very grateful and honored to have Julia Bialeski here with us on the podcast. She is a district leader, former principal, educator, and she is a recent author. And her book, which we'll talk about, Leading with Grace, Cultivating Hope, Authenticity, and a focus on people throughout the leadership lifespan. And and there is some interesting Beatle connections in Julia's life, and I'm anxious to talk about them, and I'm anxious for you, listener, to hear as well. Julia, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Sean.
I, I'm intrigued. But before we get into the Beatles podcast, I'd love to kind of hear a little bit about your leadership journey and your role and or roles and
Mhm.
just your current gig.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in many ways, I have always been a leader, and I was a leader as a child, and I've reflected now as an adult and in the current, official titles and roles that I've had about really where that journey started. And for me, it started in elementary school, with people believing in me and pushing me into situations, to be a leader, but really, started my professional life 20 years ago in public education as an elementary school teacher. I taught fifth, fourth, and first grades in that order.
Wow.
And then moved into a district role, writing curriculum and working with teachers and administrative teams on implementation for a few years before I became a school-based leader for over a decade. I was an assistant principal and principal across two districts here in Maryland, where I live, and three schools. And then most recently made a transition into a district leadership role where I serve as the coordinator of recruitment and hiring for our county here in Maryland. So recruiting for all of our positions in the district where we serve over 57,000 students.
Wow.
And so I love leadership. And what's really interesting to me is it took me decades to really feel comfortable putting that label on myself
Mm.
and putting that title on myself. So now I can look back in the rearview mirror and see how I really have always been a leader. But it really wasn't until I had the title of principal where I felt comfortable stepping into that title, and realizing the beauty of the influence that you have as a leader to
Mhm.
help other people. So that's a little bit about me, in a nutshell. But this is so exciting for me because I do have so many Beatles connections, and just getting to sort of be here and connect with you, another educator, but over this topic is just really a very special gift.
Well, I feel the same way about the gift that we're sharing right now, and just curious, I what part of Maryland? I lived in the D.C. Maryland area
Yeah.
for many
Where
years.
did you live?
I lived in Silver Spring. I lived in Tacoma
That's
Park.
Okay, so there we go. So I'm from Silver Spring, born and raised in Silver Spring, Maryland.
Oh, wow.
My parents were born and raised in the Silver Spring, Wheaton area,
Yeah,
Aspen Hill, part of Maryland. So very much the same stomping grounds. That's amazing. I can't believe, we didn't make this connection before. So, yep,
yeah.
born and raised in Silver Spring. I now live probably about 20 minutes from there.
That is a small world. Yeah, I went
It
to
sure is.
school in DC and got my bachelor's at Catholic U,
Yep.
and then I taught in inner city DC for a few years, and then I also taught in Silver Spring, and I lived off of 16th Street, East West Highway.
Hmm. Yep.
And so that those are my stomping grounds. Small man. All right, so somebody gets the red line. Yes, awesome.
Yep.
Very small
Amazing.
world. Well,
Yes, it is.
what a day maker. So speaking of parents,
Yeah.
we were talking about this how with my three grown daughters, I attempted very miserably to associate them with a Beatles song, and my wife shot them all down. So, but in your case, your
Yeah.
mother was able to kind of sneak that in.
She was successful. I don't know, I'll have to ask my dad. So I have the first thing I have to tell you, Sean, is I'm so excited about this and I've kept it a secret from my parents. So when it comes out and I can share it, it's going to
Right
be
on.
like such a gift to give to my mother in particular, and we're going to get into that. But I don't know what my dad would say now if he would agree with this story, but I believe that he maybe was not quite aware of the song. And so this was something that my mom may have snuck in, naming me Julia, because it was maybe a little bit of a lesser known Beatles song for a layperson or for someone who wasn't a huge fan, like my mother was. And so I'm the oldest of three. My brother is a junior, so my dad got the one named after him there in the middle. But I can claim being named after the Beatles song. Yes,
That is so incredibly cool. And for those who may not be familiar with the song, and I'll be sure to put a link to it in the show notes. Julia is a beautiful song
beautiful.
off of the 1968 eponymous Beatles album, also known as the White Album, and mainly written. Although it's credited to Lennon and McCartney, it really is a John song, and Julia was the name of John Lennon's mother, who he had an interesting relationship with, and they were estranged for a while. She didn't raise him; he was raised by an aunt, and just as they were reconciling and getting back together, she was tragically killed by a drunk driver. Around the time when John Lennon was a teenager, but of huge influence on his life. Very much one who indulged his love for rock and roll music, taught him, I guess, his first few chords on the banjo, which he played, and just a lovely human being, and such a beautiful song. So what a cool association. How did you how did you kind of figure this out, along the way when you were younger that you were named after this song?
Well, here's the thing, Sean. So I cannot talk about the Beatles without talking about my mother. And maybe more appropriate is that I can't talk about my mother without talking about the Beatles. So I'm 42, I'll be 43 this year,
Mhm.
and the Beatles are really in my DNA. I think every major Beatles fan believes they're the biggest Beatles fan, but of course I'm biased towards my mother and really believe that my mother is the biggest Beatles fan that there was. We had a Beatles room in our house growing up, which was really kind of a catch-all. It was a sewing room, it was an office once we got a desktop computer, but we always called it the Beatles room because it was full of all the memorabilia that she collected.
Mm.
And of the time, right, this was like pre-internet, obviously smartphones and devices where, music was so portable. It was where all the albums were. At that time, it was where all of the VHS tapes of every, bootlegged or recorded
Mhm.
televised appearance that the Beatles ever had. Paul McCartney is her favorite Beatle, so really any Paul appearances, any news clips, I mean, everything, bins and bins of these tapes. And then, of course, because everyone knew of her love of the Beatles, as I'm sure happens for you, when it was gift giving time or
Yep.
someone wanted to get something for her, she just got more and more and more. And so, I can't really remember a time when the Beatles weren't a part of my life because that was the music that was constantly playing in our home. But it
Mhm.
wasn't just about the music, it was really following Paul's work and listening to the Beatles and connecting with other Beatles fans was and is remains a passion of my mother's. And so yeah, there wasn't really a time when I became aware of that because it was just always there.
Mhm.
Um it was just always there and it still is, so now I have children. My mother has four grandchildren, and as she was an educator as well, and worked with preschool age children in her career. And she introduced the Beatles and has introduced the Beatles to so many, probably hundreds of children and young people, in addition to all of the other connections that she's made through them.
That is amazing. I really appreciate the Beatles room concept, and
Yeah.
I can, and as you say those things about your mother, I think about again my three daughters and
Yeah.
subjecting them to, different kinds of Beatle, memorabilia and moments and events. Has your mom or have you seen Paul McCartney or Ringo Starr in concert?
Oh yes. So I've seen Paul, I think once, maybe twice with her. And I've seen Ringo at least once, again, maybe twice with her. She's seen Paul many, many, many times. And I talked a little bit about the connections that she's made.
Mm-hmm.
And, when in the early days of the internet, it really opened up the world to her because she was able to connect to people from all different backgrounds, different generations, and all over the world. People whose common thread was a love of the Beatles or a love for Paul McCartney specifically. And so when we were growing up, we would say, oh, that's mom's Beatle friend, because it's someone who, now it's so common to be connected to people who you maybe have never met in person. But 30 years ago, that was not really a common thing. Again, in the early days of the internet, there just weren't there. We didn't have the ability to be connected to people like that. And she was very early on because she found people who shared this passion. And so she has been able to travel, the US with them to go see Paul when he tours. My favorite story, and I shared it with you offline, is and it's kind of a good hook, is that when I was 15 years old, it was right around the time that Paul was releasing Standing Stone,
Yeah,
his symphony.
yeah.
So it was, I guess, probably around 1997, right?
Mhm.
And he was going to do a promotional event tied to the release of this symphony at a bookstore in London. And I think it was right around the time he was knighted. Like, it was just a very kind of exciting and cool time. So I'm 15. I mentioned to you I'm the oldest. There's two other kids at home. Growing up in Silver Spring, we had a nice life, but there wasn't a lot of extra money for something extravagant like I want to go to London from the
Right.
DC area and be there for that. I mentioned I've always been a leader. I was very industrious, and I've always been a saver. So I babysat and I ran summer camps out of my parents' backyard, and I had a savings account with some money in it that I was hoping to use to buy a car when I turned 16. And I think we were at the dinner table one night, and my mom mentioned in dinner conversation, gosh, I would really love to go. And my naive, young self was like, well, then why don't you go? And she said something like, well, I mean, it's like $5,000 to fly there and get a hotel. And, that's just, it's extravagant. And I said, I'll lend it to you. And what's amazing to me now is that, 15, I'm not sure about your daughters, but I can certainly say, um, 15 is not a time when we're always kind to our mother as a young girl. And so
Not.
I was kind of right in the midst of that pretty terrible era as a teenager. So I'm pretty impressed that my reaction in that moment, in
Mm.
that time of very selfish kind of always being kind of focused on yourself as a teenager, that I heard that. And I offered that to her, and she took me up on it. She paid me back, and she said,
Yeah.
I will pay you back.
Yeah.
I know there's no rush to get that money back to you, but I'm going to take this gift. And I think probably, Sean, the reason why I did it is because I knew that this was her passion and that this was something that was really special and important to her. And so, I think there's a nuance there because we can talk about loving an artist,
Hmm.
or loving a certain type of music, or whatever the type of art is, or a sports team, or whatever it is that someone feels really passionate about. And on the surface, that can seem like that can seem confusing to some people. Like, why, how could you love that thing so much? But it's not just about the art and it's not just about the music. It is about all of those other things, the connection, what it represents to someone. And so I like to think or hope that at that age and in that moment at the dinner table, I recognize that this is something like this is the ultimate act of love that I can give to my mom, to give her this opportunity to do something that I might not understand or, might not be, what someone else would choose to do with their time or with their $5,000, but it's really important to her. So now I'm so thankful that I did that. And a lot of it is, over the course of the years, just making assumptions about why I made those choices that I did. But um, so that's just so cool for me to get to say now, that I did that for her. And, again, that's to me what's amazing about the Beatles and what they represent to me is that enduring connection and the enduring influence and all of the ways that that manifests, all these years later for a band that 7 years, is that how long they were,
Yeah,
like they
pretty
were
much.
officially a band? Yeah,
Yeah.
for 7 years. And that's just incredible to think about, just the ripple effect that that has, over time, and for people of a generation where by the time I was born they had long disbanded,
Hmm.
and and my children's generation and kids coming up. I mean, that's really to me what's so unique and special about them, is just the enduring connection that they represent.
And in many ways, when you talk about enduring connection, that kind of echoes and harkens back to our respective gigs as leaders.
Hmm.
It's not about title. It's not about corner office or all of those things. Like we are trying to foster, especially in education, foster enduring connections and to model that and to influence that for the people we serve.
Yes. And I mean, it's so funny you use that word influence, because that's another word I had sort of jotted down as I was making some notes this morning and thinking about coming. And what you just said, a mentor of mine always cites that Maya Angelou quote: people will forget what you said, they will forget what you did, but they will never forget how you made them feel. And to me, there's such a parallel there between the work and the music and the artistry of the Beatles.
Yes.
It's not just about, I mean, people love the music, right? But it's about what they remember and how they felt when they first heard that song, or what a certain lyric evokes for them. And leadership is the same.
Hmm.
It's, someone may not remember exactly what you said or how you did something that really inspired them, but they remember how you made them feel. And it is that influence, that endures, and that legacy that we hope to build as leaders, that the Beatles really have left as a result of that 7 year collaboration that they had as a band, and just all of the influence that that has had on other artists and on regular people, right, like us, who have found ways to make connections in our own lives.
There's a lot of things in terms of leadership in Beatles that as you say, there's a lot of things there that intersect, and I've written about that, in the Pepper Effect. And
Yeah.
there's different things that they consciously did, that they were aware of in terms of that influence. For example, the earlier songs like "She Loves You," "I Want to Hold Your Hand," those were, those kind of personal usage of second person
Yeah.
pronouns to make connections. Their albums, they wanted to make sure that people got their money's worth, that there wasn't filler. Like it was 14 songs and they didn't put the singles on that, because they hated when they were younger when they would buy an album and there was like one or two songs and the rest of the album was filler. So there was a lot of consciousness and intentionality that I think leaders can take from that in terms of being aware of legacy. How else do you see that as from a leadership perspective?
Yeah, in the book, I that phrase, the leadership lifespan. So I really structured my book around this idea of the leadership lifespan, and how as leaders, we enter and exit many different roles, right, throughout our lives and throughout the span of our careers, in whatever title that might be or whatever that looks like. And it can look like, for me or for you, it can look like moving to a new school. It
Hmm.
can look like moving to a new place. It can look like a career change where you take on a new role. And for a musical artist, it can look like embarking on a new project or a new album. And the idea of the leadership lifespan is this idea that, I mean, you at least you enter and you exit a role at some point, and along the way, you're going to encounter many similar themes, many similar experiences,
Mm.
but you have to have a combination of the things you know and staying true to who you are, and also adapting and being flexible and fluid to the situation, to the context in which you're in. And I think there's such a parallel there to the work of the Beatles, because in that short span of 7 years, they were true to who they were, but their work evolved. It changed. They always kept creativity in there. They never settled for status quo when they easily could have at the height of their popularity. They could have put anything out and people would
Right.
have bought it. But they were all so talented in their own right, competitive with one another and competitive with themselves, and trying to just always outdo what they had done before. You talked about the albums, thinking about what their album covers would look like at a time when that wasn't really something that people cared about or that people were
Right.
doing. If I'm correct, they were the first to include like the liner notes and the lyric sheets
Yes.
in their albums. You talked about getting your money's worth. Like, how can I add value, right? So there's a leadership connection there to what can I do to add value for the people who I serve, right?
Mm.
For their fans to feel like they were getting their money's worth out of buying an album. If when you and I write a book, people are going to spend their hard-earned money on our book, and we want to make sure that they take something away from that. Um, I think they represent the power of a team. I mean, they're like the ultimate representation of the power of a team, and it's not always rainbows and sunshine and unicorns, right? It sometimes is that piece of I have amazing, incredible talent and strength, and you have amazing, incredible talent and strength, but they're very different. But when they come together and complement one another, they can be incredible. And when they butt up against one another, then there a lot of conflict can be created, and we have to decide how we're going to work and coexist through that. And certainly in what I know and what you know in public education, we come up against that all the time. But what I've learned, the more I've engaged with people around the book and just in talking about leadership with folks, obviously I'm thinking through the lens of what I know as an educator, but when I talk to people who have only worked in corporate settings, and I talk to people who have worked in, government, other government sort of agencies, or whatever their field might be, these are common themes that everyone experiences in their leadership roles. And so, obviously the Beatles were leaders in their field. They maybe had some friction and some tension among them
Mm.
of who was the leader at any given time, and certainly that caused conflict. But out of conflict, we know can come really beautiful music and really
Right.
great art and really great work. Because sometimes you have to get past that conflict to be able to achieve whatever it is that your end goal might be.
It's funny you mention that because I'm actually writing about that very thing as we speak, in terms through the lens of the Beatles, specifically through the Get Back, Let It Be sessions, and I'm working on a follow up to the Pepper effect. It's the Let It Be effect, and how, even though those sessions weren't unicorns and rainbows and all you need is love, still
Yes.
great work came out of that. At one point, George left the band, and the three of them were, what do we do? How do we cope with this? So there was a lot
Yeah.
of mess going on, but yet somehow they persevere through the conflict, which great teams do, and
Hmm.
and have some crucial conversations and honest conversations, which great teams do, and somehow created, in my opinion, a really unifying, lasting body of work. Um, we as leaders, and I struggle with this too, and I'm sure you do as well, is we want to avoid conflict, and not that we want to go in and argue and debate and shoot people down, but sometimes by embracing and leaning into the mess and perhaps listening to things that we may not, or people that we may not want to listen to, great growth and great things can come out of that.
Yeah, that's 100% true. And I think sometimes we wait as leaders, as just as people, right? We try to wait it out. We see like, well, maybe if I just kind of let this go, it'll work itself out, but more often than not it doesn't. And we
Right.
realize that we have to figure out how to get through this. Sometimes eventually we get to a point where okay, this isn't working anymore and we need to move on and do something different. And it doesn't negate everything that we've done previously. Sometimes we kind of stumble our way through, and leadership is so much about reflection and looking back on why did things turn out that way? How did I contribute to that? What was my role in that? What would I have done differently? How can I move forward and try to ensure that this, challenge doesn't come up again, or that this conflict doesn't present itself again, so that I can be better next time. And I think what you're speaking to as well about some of that conflict that they had during that time in the band is about ego, right? And
Yes.
so a lot of the conflict that they had amongst themselves was about ego, and we run into that in our work as well as leaders. You sort of have to have a little bit of an ego to
Mhm.
be comfortable being in that role. I talked with you about not really being comfortable taking on that title. And you can't, I guess I have a belief that you can't really fully step into a leadership role if you're not comfortable putting that title on yourself. You
Yeah.
can't truly and fully and authentically do that.
Yeah.
And as an artist at the caliber of all four of the Beatles were, you have to have a little bit of an ego. I mean, you're in the wrong job if you don't have that a little bit.
Yeah.
So it's you're walking that tightrope all the time, trying to temper it. Like, when is it kind of time to turn this on, and when do I need to be really mindful and thoughtful about this? Listen to somebody who I might not really want to listen to, but who actually might be the person who has the path forward, or the way forward, or who might need to check me a little bit if I might be stepping out of line.
Yeah, beautifully said. What besides Julia, what Beatles songs are your go-to? What albums are your kind of go-to? I'm just curious in a Julia Bialeski Beatles playlist. Let's make a mixtape.
Yes. So, okay, well, my favorite Beatles song right now, I guess, is Get Back. I love the bass line in that song. And
Mm,
when I usually listen to music is when I'm out walking my dog, and I just love the bass line. I like can step, to
yeah,
it, and love that.
yeah,
I mean, I love Hey Jude.
yeah,
Absolutely love that song. Um, there really isn't a bad Beatles song, Sean. It's sort of my opinion. I think, what's so fun is, you know, we don't go to like a lot of tribute bands and things like that, but
right.
a summer or two ago, we went with my kids and my parents to this outdoor venue to see a Beatles cover band. And so there were babies all the way up to 80-year olds who were there. And what was so fun and amazing was every single song. Every person who was there was singing along, knew all the words, was up and dancing. My son was probably maybe 12 at the time, and he was up and dancing around. Um, that's what I just love.
Yeah, I'm with you. There are from a family perspective, and I know you can attest to this and your mother.
Yes.
There's something I have so many beautiful memories associated with Beatles songs and my children. And,
Yeah.
whether it's playing Beatles Rock Band on the Wii in our
Mm-hmm.
basement and me belting out Helter Skelter, or singing along to All Together Now, which is such a great children's song,
Mm-hmm.
from the Yellow Submarine. Uh,
Yes.
and then seeing, like I said, and we, you know what, we may have been at the same show now that I'm thinking about this. Um, I think it was 2013, 2014, one of those years where Paul played in Washington D.C. and
Yeah.
I brought my wife and I, we drove up from North Carolina and took our daughters, and that was the closest that I came to Paul McCartney. That's a whole nother long story. But now that I'm thinking about this, if with your mom being a super fan and me living in Maryland, we may have rubbed shoulders, like when the new Beatles song "Free as a Bird" came out at midnight.
Yeah.
I remember going to the Borders bookstore
Yes.
at White Flint
Yeah.
for that event, and who knows, you may have been there, or
I don't know if I was, but she may have been.
I
That
bet
I
you
do
she
remember
was.
that.
I
Yeah.
bet you she was, and
Yeah.
so. It's like all those kinds of moments with family and kids for me. It's hard for me to not get emotional
Yeah.
when I hear certain songs, or I'll have, you know, certain sing-alongs when they were little, and those moments,
Yes.
you know.
Yeah, I mean that's 100%. That is that enduring connection, right? So it's about the music, but it's about so much more than the music. It's about the moments in time that gives people to remember about their children who might be grown when they were really little. It's like that powerful connection between music and memory.
Mhm.
And they're, obviously prolific, and their music is just so well known and so much of a part of the fiber of popular culture and of so many families that it's impossible not to have that when you hear their music. I mean, even for someone who doesn't have the same depth of knowledge and trivia as you do, or as my mother does, who's able to recall dates and all of these different things. It's hard to think of an example of a special time in life where that music wasn't in the background for me.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, and you said that very diplomatically. I'm sure your mom, like me, we have this kind of annoyingly arcane knowledge of the Beatles, where we can cite certain things, and people just look at us and nod their head, or shake their head, and
But you know what, Sean? I think that's kind of the nuance I was talking about earlier is that's one way to look at it, what you just said. But the way I look at it is everyone should have something that
yes.
they are so interested in. And, as educators, we value lifelong learning, right? And what
Mhm.
this is an example of lifelong learning. No one is telling you that you have to have this knowledge. You are self-motivated to learn more, to read more, to
Mhm.
pass your knowledge on through podcasting and writing and the teaching that you do around it, to build these connections. To me, like that is the ultimate example of lifelong learning. And that's why, to me, it doesn't matter what the thing is, right? Like for
Exactly.
you and for my mom, it's the Beatles. Everyone should have something that they are so passionate about and so interested in that when they have a Saturday afternoon or a Tuesday night to really plan to themselves and what would they do, that's what they choose to devote their time and energy to. Everyone deserves to have something that they love that much, just because they love it.
Thank you for sharing that. That is, wow. I feel so validated and uplifted right now. But you're right. As I tell folks, if it's not the Beatles, it can be anything. I mean,
It
this
can be anything.
you can substitute this podcast for, why do the Baltimore Ravens matter?
Yes,
Or
professional soccer or
yeah.
baking or whatever it is, um, reading, just and knitting, anything, whatever it is that people are interested in. And in life in 2025,
Mm.
we don't often have time. A lot of people don't have time in these busy lives that we lead to devote to a hobby. But there is great value and in our overall well-being and in our health over really having time to devote to hobbies and passions. I think again through the lens of being an educator, but also being a parent, being able to model for young people.
Yes.
the importance of that. They have so much competing for their attention these days, and mostly it's, on a screen or on a device is what
Mhm.
is pulling their attention. But modeling for them, um, no matter how old you are, wanting to learn about something, wanting to learn something new, wanting to talk to somebody with whom you may have never had the opportunity to connect outside of maybe a shared interest or
Yeah.
something in common, and taking the time to do that. I mean, there's just so many connections. It really is just all of the ripples of influence that a rock band can have on life and for generations and for decades and on people. So everyone should have their Beatles. Everyone should have something about which they are passionate, about which they are keenly interested in, and they have that intrinsic motivation to just continue to research and to learn and to connect to their own lives.
Oh, right on, man. I mean, the passion that you're sharing here is so contagious, and it really goes back to, and I love your, being a former high school English teacher and having such an appreciation for words, and for me, kind of the big takeaway, from our conversation is, leadership is about fostering enduring connection, and
Yes.
not only, and that requires a lot. That requires us being connected with our own core, being connected with our own belief system, and perhaps having that passion, that outlet that we feel connected to, if it's the Beatles or soccer or baking or whatever it may be. But then also, you know, that enduring connection with the people we serve,
Yep.
and being aware of that and being intentional with that. I mean, you just dropped like a mini masterclass leadership coaching session here, Julia.
Well, thank you. I mean, I think what you're talking about there, Sean, is that's the authenticity piece, right? So
Mhm.
in the subtitle of my book, it talks about cultivating authenticity. And, in your school, your students probably know many things about you, and they probably one of those things is like, oh, he's the Beatles guy. But that's the authenticity of who you are. And the reason why people remember you after they no longer work with you, or students, move on to the next level of schooling, or you move, and you're away from people, what they remember is who you authentically are. And that's, the most effective leaders that I've known, and the leader that I try to be is authentic to who I am. And
Yes.
when I became comfortable standing in that label and standing in that title of leader is when I let go of trying to replicate how someone else did it, or to do what someone else did, and really was authentic to myself. And then it was like a light switch went off. And again, the Beatles, like no one was more authentic to who they were and to the type of music and artistry that they wanted to bring. For every detail, that the fashion, the way that they, just the way that they did everything, the way they recorded their music, it was authentic to who they were. And that's why it spoke to people, and why we are sitting here, however many years, 55 years later,
Mhm.
and talking about them. And people are listening, and they're interested in hearing people talk about them because of that authenticity.
Right on, Julia. Speaking of the book, I'd love for you to share just a little bit more about it, and what kind of compelled you to pull together your own Beatles level masterpiece, and then also perhaps how people can track down the book.
Sure. So, I've always loved to write. I love that you mentioned that you were a high school English teacher. I had a very special high school English teacher, and very special teachers all through my life who really encouraged my love of writing. I remember typing stories on the typewriter that we had at home, pages and pages and pages of stories, and really always thought I'd be a writer. That was as a child. That's what I thought I would do. So it was kind of always this pipe dream that I had. But that felt very intimidating to me, the idea of actually writing a whole actual book that you could hold in your hands. And It actually was when I transitioned to my most recent role in a district leadership role, and I left my school-based leadership role. Being a principal, so much of your identity is tied up in being a principal because it
Yes.
is it is more than just a job. There is no job on the planet Earth that I could or would ever love more than I loved being a principal.
Right on.
And when you leave a role like that, you go through a process, you go through a recalibration.
Hmm.
And I did a lot of writing to process that. And one
Hmm.
thing that I wrote was sort of a love letter to my staff and to my school to read to them on the day that I knew I had to share with them that I was leaving.
Hmm.
And the response that I got to what I wrote was very affirming to me. And it sort of planted this seed that, well, maybe I do have something to say that people might be interested in reading. And so I just kind of started pulling together different things that I had written and seeing like how could I structure this and how could this turn into a book, and the result is something I'm really proud of. It's a combination of personal stories from my time as a principal, like sort of leadership lessons through the
Hmm.
lens of what I knew. Um, but I really wanted it to be something that everyone who reads it can really see it through their own lens and reflect on wherever they are in their own leadership journey, whether that is in education, which is the lens through which the book is written, or it is in another field. How can they sort of read my stories, think about the lessons or the tips that might be presented, and then how is that going to present in their own role or in their own life? So, Leading with Grace is available wherever you get books. It's on Amazon in paperback or Kindle format. It's on Barnes and Noble. You can, contact me through my website for bulk orders if you're interested in that. But it's just been really a labor of love and so wonderful to be able to put it out. It's very flattering to have you say it even in the same sentence as Beatles' masterpiece, but I'll take it.
Hey, it is. I really appreciate it, and I appreciate the specifically the anecdotes and stories there. So there's just some great value there, and I'll be sure to put the link in the show notes.
That'd be
With
great.
that,
Thank you.
Julia, do you have any plans or any speaking gigs, or are you on a book tour at any time soon?
Well, so I have a couple speaking opportunities coming up, mostly local here in the area. I'm really excited to be sharing a session, actually at the Metropolitan Police Department Women's Conference,
Nice.
coming up in March. And so it will be female law enforcement personnel from all over the DC metropolitan area.
Awesome.
And again, something I'm really excited about is while I've never worked in law enforcement and that is, certainly not my wheelhouse or my field, I think there are so many transferable lessons from what I know as an educator.
Right.
And specifically, I have a passion for speaking with people, with women, with all leaders, about well-being and about taking care of ourselves so that we can take care
Mhm.
of people who we serve. So I'm really looking forward to that coming up. Yeah, and trying to just engage with as many people as possible and share my passion for leadership with others.
Well, Julia, I'm very grateful for you sharing so much here on this episode. And how can folks get a hold of you? And I know you're very active in social media and such.
Yeah, I'm trying. It's funny. I've kind of been a late adopter to that, but it has fostered so many connections and really
Mm.
opened the world up to me. So you can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me on Instagram. Again, I have a website. I'm sure Sean will put everything in the show notes, and I would love to connect with other Beatles fans, with other lovers of leadership, with other educators, with people, because it's just been so amazing to see all the great connections and people that you meet through social media. It's really fun.
Absolutely. It is just a really it's a great network, and I know Ringo Starr is touring this spring and
Yes.
summer with behind his new country album, which is pretty remarkable. But hopefully you and your mom can make a road trip. I don't know if you'll be in the D.C., Maryland metropolitan area, but I know he's coming to North Carolina in June, and I'm planning to see him, and I'm excited about it. It'll be, I think it's the fourth or fifth time I've seen him in concert, so I'm
Yeah.
excited about that.
Yeah, it's so special to get to have that opportunity to go. And wouldn't that be fun if we were able to cross paths at a show? That would be so cool.
Absolutely. And not many people, Julia, I'll say this, drop the beauty of Paul's funky bass line on Get Back. So
I love it.
I respect that. I've been rewatching the Get Back documentary on Disney
hmm
Plus, and I love one of my favorite scenes in the film is where he basically pulls that song out of the air, where he's just riffing on the bass, and he just
It's
starts
amazing.
just
Yeah.
it's just that's it's genius.
Yeah. It's really amazing to like get to just think about the genius. It's awe-inspiring to just think about the genius. And each of us have that in some way. Each of us have that in us in some way. And but to see it and to hear it is just incredible.
Yeah. Well, you're incredible, and I'm very grateful for your time on a Saturday. And the book is Leading with Grace, Cultivating Hope, Authenticity, and a focus on people throughout the leadership lifespan. Be sure to pick up that book. Be sure to connect with Julia Bialeski. Julia, you are and your mother are invited on this podcast at any point.
Well, she just might have to take you up on that after
Yeah,
she hears this. So I hope you're ready to deliver on that promise because
I
she might
am.
want to take you up on
I am.
it.
I'm saving her a seat, and definitely we will probably Beatles super fan out.
I
And
bet you would.
because I want to hear about her standing stone trip from her point of view. That must have been
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah. And it's one of many. She'll have 100 stories for
Oh
you.
man. Well, Mom, you're invited. So we'll make that happen. Thank you so much, Julia, and grateful for your time and your expertise and your passion. Friends, this is Sean Gaylord with Why the Beatles Matter, and my guest and my friend Julia Bialeski has definitely proven that point and shown it in so many ways. Be sure to follow her and to seek out her leadership expertise and to read her book. Thank you so much for tuning in, and as always, stay fab. This is Sean Gaylord, Why the Beatles Matter.